Were there other empty tomb stories in antiquity? Hi, everybody. My name is Robin Walsh. I'm a scholar of New Testament and early Christianity and part of Paths in Biblical Studies. And I thought to bring you this question because I've noticed it popping up a few times over the last month. It's something that has come up in my own sessions. I hold open forums for Q&A. At least once a month over at the BSA, the Biblical Studies Academy, as does other scholars, or like Bart Ehrman, for example. But I've also heard it come up in some other podcasts with biblical scholars. So there are a couple of ways for us to approach it. Now, the first is to say that the idea of the bodily ascension of someone, and this meaning that they now have some kind of superhuman status or they've become a deity, this was quite common and in the Greek and Roman world. You see it as a piece of discourse, both in literature, but also something that you see even politically, even something you see in what we might term material culture. So in programmatic imagery produced particularly by the empire, it's all over the place. So a couple of examples, you'll have the story of a Roman emperor, say Augustus. Usually cremation was a very popular method for disposing of a body in the Roman period. So you might have the account of someone like Augustus or another Roman emperor having their body burned, cremated on a pyre, and then there was some kind of cosmic sign, something like a comet goes across the sky, and then everybody is able to say, oh, well, that's the body of Augustus, or that is Augustus, his spirit, going up to heaven. He's now a deity. So there's all kind of cosmology wrapped up in this. You also have on something like the Arch of Titus, which is by the Flavian Amphitheater, the Colosseum, right on the top of the arch. So really strategically placed, you have an image of Titus on the back of an eagle. And the idea there is that he's being deified. He's ascending up into the sky, up into heaven, and he's becoming a god. So that idea was out there. So that is not unique. But the question of the empty tomb itself, I could see where that comes from. Is that unique to Christianity? Now, the answer is no. And I can give you a few examples of where we see this. And the first one I'm going to give you is actually from something called a Greek novel. And I'm going to read to you a passage that is of interest. So let me close this screen. Okay, so the first passage I want to read to you, and we'll put it up here, is from a Greek novel called Chaereton. Or by a writer named Chaereton. It's usually referred to as Chaereton. The title is Chaereas and Callirhoe. Sometimes I actually hear people just call it Callirhoe. But this Greek novel, now the term Greek novel, it's sort of a catch-all for a genre of literature in antiquity that was very much like romantic fiction. And so it wasn't just novels in Greek. They could also be in Latin, but the term encapsulates this idea of sort of a romantic story that involves all kinds of drama and star-crossed lovers. You might have heard me mention this before if you've seen other videos, where it's very Romeo and Juliet, and that's exactly what you have here with Chaereton. And in this passage that I want us to look at, what has happened is that Callirhoe has died, and her would-be boyfriend has heard about it, and of course he wants to go to her tomb to pay his respects. And so here's the passage when he goes to the tomb to see his beloved. When he reached the tomb, he found that the stones had been moved, and the entrance was open. He was astonished at the sight and overcome by fearful perplexity at what had happened. He, Chaereas, hunted through the tomb. He could find nothing. He looked toward the heavens, stretched up his arms, and cried, "Which of the gods is it then, who has become my rival in love and carried off Callirhoe, and is now keeping her with him against her will, constrained by a more powerful destiny? It looks as if I have a goddess for a wife without knowing it." So you can untangle this passage, or you could at least see what is going on in terms of what this both literary imagery, but also what's implied by the empty tomb, the rolling of this stone. Even if it's against her will, as he says here, the idea is that Callirhoe has become a deity. She's some other god's girlfriend. She's become a goddess. This idea of the bodily ascension is there, but also the idea of the empty tomb signifying that change in status. And I think that's what's key here, is that this is the kind of dramatic turn, the kind of, we sometimes use the word in Greek, topoi, or topos in the singular, but the idea that this is a theme or the kind of storytelling that people found interesting. They found it dramatic, they found it compelling, and they found it very vivid, but they knew what it meant. They knew what the symbolism meant. So there you have a case of a Greek novel. Greek novels are dated to around the 1st, 2nd century of this kind of storytelling taking place, and everybody sort of understanding exactly what is implied there, and that being, you know, a little bit over explained, but also revealed in this particular novel. Now, I can give you a couple of other examples that are a little less that clear cut as the Greek novel, but I think interesting nonetheless. So one is from a also 1st or 2nd century text called the Satyricon. And the Satyricon is actually a collection of little short stories, essentially, that are picking up on characters that I think you could actually say go all the way back to sort of the Greek comics. So we still have this in sitcoms today, like the ravenous widow, or like the prostitute with the heart of gold, or all these stock characters from antiquity. We still have a lot of them. Actually, I show a lot of images from romantic comedies today when I teach about this. So they go back to those sort of themes, but they also retell, the Satyricon is retelling and repackaging stories that people found entertaining and really liked, but sort of in a different kind of collected key. And the story that I want to draw to your attention is called The Widow of Ephesus, and it's actually what's called a Milesian tale, which means it's deriving itself from a sort of topos that goes back hundreds of years to other kinds of storytelling. And the basic contours of the story are this. A man has died, and his widow has come to his tomb. Stone is rolled back. She's in the tomb, mourning, lamenting his loss, and she can't be persuaded to leave his side within the tomb. Outside of the tomb, there's a Roman soldier who's guarding 3 crucified men. He hears the cries of the widow. He goes inside the tomb. And to make a long story short, I actually wrote about this in my 2021 book, The Origins of Early Christian Literature. So maybe we can put up a paragraph from my book. Actually, let me read you a little section. It spares me the embarrassment of going into detail. He goes in, he sees the widow. He sort of courts her and tries to get her over her loss. So let me read you this paragraph here. Then the tale takes a turn. Our author reminds the reader that temptation generally assails human beings on a full stomach. They've been eating and drinking. Basically, they ordered Uber Eats and stayed in. The soldier begins to make his move, and the widow finds herself receptive to his good looks and clever speech. For 3 nights, the soldier and the widow lock themselves away in the tomb, making love and indulging in all the fine things his means permitted. On the third night, the soldier's post abandoned, the family of one of the crucified men steal his body off of the cross in order to provide a customary burial. In the morning, realizing his grievous error, the soldier returns to the widow in the tomb in terror of punishment and threatens suicide. It's at this point that the widow conspires to make a dead man useful rather than send a live man to death. Together, they remove the corpse of her husband from his tomb and affix him to the cross instead. And then the people are left wondering, how did this dead man get up on this cross? And why is this tomb empty, right? Like, that's the implication. So again, this is a story that is compelling, entertaining, interesting to people. There's also a similar theme, I would say, in some stories that we term paradoxography or paradoxographical tales. There's one that comes to mind to me about kind of like this, you know, not ravenous widow, but also sort of like a libidinous character where there was a young woman who passes away. She's put into a tomb. Her family actually has a visitor, a young man who comes to the house, and randomly this like hot young girl keeps coming to visit him in his bed chamber at night, and they're hooking up. And one of the maids catches a glimpse of her, and it's the dead daughter. So everybody sort of Hamlet style hides behind some curtains to see who this girl is one night. And then when they realize it's the dead daughter, everybody freaks out. Turns out it was her ghost coming to hook up with this dude. And so then they all run to the tomb, and the stone is rolled away, and her bra is sitting on the bier where her body had been. So again, this is a tale that is out there, and I would say the takeaway here is probably not that these are one-to-one equivalencies between the Gospels and the Greek novel or the paradoxographical tales or the Satyricon, but that the Gospel authors were well aware of this topos, that people would be compelled by it, but they would also understand what the symbolism was behind the empty tomb itself. And so I don't think it's that deep. I think it's just an example of how the gospel writers are trying to convey Jesus's change in status from a mortal to a supermortal, a superhuman being. And they're doing so in a typical literary way for the time. If you found this interesting, please check us out at bartehrman.com/BSA Learning. Again, BSA stands for Biblical Studies Academy. There we have something like over 170 hours of courses, other kinds of materials where leading scholars in the field give you access to what's going on with the critical study of the Bible, both the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, as well as allied subjects. I tend to do a lot on material culture, so the catacombs and Christian art, for example. So please go check it out, find something that interests you, and delve into these topics a little bit more. And I guess check out my book. Since I mentioned it, we'll put a little blurb somewhere in this video, but don't worry about it. But if you're interested in this kind of comparative example, there are a lot there. If there are any other kinds of comparisons or questions you have, let us know, and I can do my best to show you how the Gospels interface with that kind of literature. But again, check out bartehrman.com/BSA Learning. Shouldn't have mentioned my book.